Apollo's nails scrabbled frantically against the linoleum floor as he lunged toward bed 12, his powerful jaws clamping onto the metal frame with a ferociousness that shocked everyone in room 304. The German shepherd's bark, normally gentle around the children's ward, erupted into desperate, guttural sounds that echoed through St. Elizabeth's midnight corridors. "Get that dog out of here now, Doctor," Margaret Howell shouted as nurses rushed toward 8-year-old Ethan Wilson's bedside. The boy lay motionless, thin tubes connecting his small body to quietly humming machines. Suddenly, the heart monitor stuttered, its steady rhythm faltering before emitting a high-pitched alarm. The sound silenced everyone, even Apollo, whose amber eyes remained fixed on the bed. As Dr. Howell lunged for the breathing apparatus, the horrible truth dawned on her. She froze, her weathered hands trembling as 30 years of medical certainty crumbled. The dog had known all along. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Elizabeth's Children's Hospital stood as a modern beacon of hope amid Phoenix's urban sprawl, its gleaming facade reflecting the merciless Arizona summer sun. Inside, the air conditioning hummed relentlessly, creating an artificial winter that contrasted sharply with the triple-digit temperatures outside. It was early August, and the city was enduring its 43rd consecutive day above 100 degrees. In the pediatric intensive care unit on the 3rd floor, room 304 had become the unlikely battleground between medicine's rigid protocols and something far less quantifiable. The room, with its pale blue walls and cheerful solar system decals, housed 6 young patients. But it was bed 12 by the window that had become the center of an unfolding mystery. Apollo, a magnificent 5-year-old German shepherd with a glossy black and tan coat, had been part of St. Elizabeth's therapy animal program for nearly 2 years. Before that, he'd served as a search and rescue dog, with a distinguished record of finding survivors after natural disasters. His gentle demeanor and intuitive connection with children had made him the crown jewel of the hospital's comfort care initiative. 8-year-old Ethan Wilson had been in a coma for 11 days following a devastating car accident on Interstate 17. The boy, with a mop of sandy blonde hair and a sprinkle of freckles across his nose, had been a vibrant child obsessed with dinosaurs and Lego architecture before tragedy struck. His hospital room was now dotted with cards from his second-grade classmates and a plastic Tyrannosaurus Rex standing guard on his bedside table. Ethan's parents maintained their vigil with the mechanical precision of people functioning solely on coffee and desperation. Robert Wilson, 42, a construction project manager with calloused hands and deepening worry lines, sat awkwardly in hospital chairs designed for shorter visits. Jennifer Wilson, 39, an elementary school librarian, alternated between reading aloud from Ethan's favorite books and staring vacantly at the monitoring equipment. Dr. Margaret Howell had been treating critically ill children since before most of her staff were born. At 61, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen everything, or thought she had until Apollo arrived. Nurse Sarah Calloway, with her practical ponytail and compassionate efficiency, had been the first to notice Apollo's strange behavior, while Dave Turner, the ex-military handler who ran the therapy animal program, found himself defending his star dog's inexplicable change in temperament. None of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine around the mystery of what Apollo knew that they didn't. Apollo's first visit to room 304 after Ethan's admission had been unremarkable. The German Shepherd had padded quietly from bed to bed that Tuesday morning, gently resting his head on mattresses to receive weak pats from small hands. Dave Turner had watched with quiet pride as the dog brought momentary smiles to exhausted parents and bedridden children. "He's got a gift," Dave had told Jennifer Wilson as Apollo visited each child in turn. "Some dogs are just born with it, knowing exactly how gentle to be. Which kids need extra attention?" Dave's weathered face, lined from years of outdoor training with military and rescue canines, softened when he spoke about Apollo. Jennifer had nodded absently, her attention fixed on her son's motionless form. Ethan's accident had left him with significant head trauma, and the doctors remained cautiously non-committal about his prognosis. Like most parents in her situation, Jennifer had absorbed medical terminology at an alarming rate: intracranial pressure, Glasgow Coma Scale, brain stem function, while understanding that none of these terms could tell her when or if her boy would wake up. Apollo had worked his way methodically around the room, spending a few minutes with each child before moving to the next. When he approached bed 12, Dave expected the same routine. Instead, Apollo had stopped several feet from Ethan's bed, his ears suddenly alert, head tilted slightly as though listening to something inaudible to human ears. "Apollo, visit," Dave commanded softly, using the cue that signaled the dog to approach a patient. Apollo remained frozen, his normally relaxed posture now rigid with attention. "That's strange," Dave murmured, giving the leash a gentle tug. "He's never done this before." Jennifer had looked up then, her exhausted eyes focusing properly on the dog for the first time. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Wait. I know this dog," she said, her voice hoarse from too many tears and too little sleep. "Wasn't he part of that rescue demonstration at Hillcrest Elementary last month?" Dave's eyebrows raised in surprise. "Yes, ma'am. Apollo does educational visits to schools when he's not here at the hospital." "Your son's school?" Jennifer nodded, reaching for her phone and scrolling through pictures with trembling fingers. "Ethan was so excited. He talked about Apollo for days afterward." She turned the screen toward Dave, showing a photo of a beaming Ethan with his arm around Apollo, the boy's grin wide beneath a future rescue hero sticker on his T-shirt. It was at that moment that Apollo suddenly moved forward, approaching Ethan's bed with unusual intensity. He pressed his nose against the boy's limp hand, then looked up at the monitors, then back at the child. A low whine escaped his throat. "He remembers him," Jennifer whispered, a fragile hope in her voice. Dave wasn't so sure. In his 15 years of working with service animals, he'd seen many unusual behaviors, but something about Apollo's body language struck him as different, not recognition, but concern. Over the next 3 days, Apollo's behavior around Ethan grew increasingly peculiar. During his scheduled therapy rounds, the dog would work dutifully with other patients, but would become visibly agitated when approaching room 304. By Friday, he was pulling toward Ethan's bed with such determination that Dave had difficulty maintaining control. "I don't understand it," Dave told Nurse Sarah as Apollo sat rigidly beside Ethan's bed, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. "He's never acted like this with any patient." Sarah Calloway, who had been monitoring Ethan's vital signs, shook her head. "Animals sense things we don't," she said. "My grandmother used to say her old hound could smell sickness coming before the doctor ever diagnosed it." Dave might have dismissed such folk wisdom if it had come from someone else. But Sarah's practical nature made her observation more credible. "Has there been any change in Ethan's condition?" "Nothing significant," Sarah replied, checking the charts. "His intracranial pressure has stabilized. Brain activity is consistent with coma state. Dr. Howell reviewed his case this morning." Apollo's whine interrupted them, followed by something unprecedented. The dog stood on his hind legs, front paws carefully placed on the very edge of Ethan's mattress, nose twitching as he inspected the boy's breathing tube. "Apollo, off!" Dave commanded sharply. The dog reluctantly returned to all fours but remained unusually alert. On Saturday morning, everything changed. Dave arrived with Apollo for their regular rounds to find Robert Wilson arguing with Dr. Howell in the hallway outside room 304. "Don't care what the reason is," Robert was saying, his voice tight with strain. "That dog was barking at my son's bed at 3 a.m. The whole ward was awake." Dr. Howell noticed Dave and Apollo approaching, and her expression hardened. "Mr. Turner, we need to discuss Apollo's continued participation in the therapy program. We had an incident last night. It was the beginning of a mystery that would divide the hospital staff, challenge medical certainty, and ultimately reveal that sometimes the most sophisticated instruments in medicine couldn't compete with the instincts of a dog who refused to be ignored." "This is completely unacceptable," Dr. Howell stated, arms crossed as she faced Dave in the small conference room they'd commandeered for their impromptu meeting. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual immaculate bun, but the tight lines around her mouth betrayed her frustration. "3 night nurses reported that your dog was practically howling at 3 a.m. We have critically ill children who need rest. Not a midnight concert." Dave Turner sat straight-backed in his chair, the posture of his military days never quite leaving him. "With all due respect, Dr. Howell, Apollo has never had a behavioral incident in the 2 years he's been coming here. There must be something wrong." "The only thing wrong," Dr. Howell interrupted, "is that a therapy animal is disturbing patients and staff. Whatever the reason, it can't continue." Hospital Administrator Patricia Langley, a woman whose business suits were as crisp as her decisions, tapped her pen against the meeting agenda. "The hospital board has always supported the therapy animal program, Dave, but our priority must be patient care." "Apollo is part of patient care," Dave insisted, leaning forward. "He's helped dozens of kids through difficult treatments, provided comfort during painful procedures. And now he's barking at a comatose child and biting hospital equipment." Dr. Howell cut in. "This morning, a staff member found teeth marks on Ethan Wilson's bed frame." The revelation hung in the air. Dave's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. "That's not like him at all, which is precisely why we're having this conversation instead of simply terminating the program," Administrator Langley said, her tone softening slightly. "Given Apollo's history, we're willing to give you 48 hours to resolve this situation. After that, if his behavior continues, he'll need to be removed from the program." Dave nodded slowly, knowing this was as much compromise as he could expect. "I understand." "Thank you." Outside in the hallway, Sarah Calloway was waiting, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "Bad," Dave admitted. 48 hours to figure out what's going on with him, or he's out." Sarah glanced down the corridor toward room 304, where Apollo now sat beside Jennifer Wilson. The dog's eyes, never leaving Ethan's bed. "There's something else you should know. Apollo wouldn't eat this morning. I tried offering him treats during my break, but he just turned away." Dave frowned. In all the years he'd worked with Apollo, the dog had never refused food. "That's concerning. I'll take him to the staff break room. See if I can get him to eat something there." But Apollo wouldn't eat in the break room either. Not the premium dog food Dave offered, nor the turkey sandwich Sarah sacrificed from her lunch. The German shepherd simply lay beside Dave's chair, his eyes fixed on the door, body tense as though waiting for something. "It's like he's on duty," Dave murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. "Like when we were working earthquake sites." Sarah tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Dave ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Search and rescue dogs have different behaviors when they're actively working versus when they're resting. Apollo's exhibiting all his old search behaviors, the alertness, the focus, the unwillingness to be distracted by food. It's like he's on a mission." "But what mission?" Sarah asked. "Ethan's not lost. He's right there in bed 12. By afternoon, word had spread throughout the pediatric ward about Apollo's unusual behavior. Some staff members avoided room 304 altogether, while others made special trips past it, curious about the dog that had suddenly developed an obsession with one particular patient. Among the nurses, theories ranged from the practical to the supernatural. "Maybe the kid's condition is changing in some way the monitors aren't picking up," suggested one nurse. "Or maybe Apollo senses he's going to wake up soon," offered another. "My grandmother would say that dog sees something we can't," added an elderly orderly, crossing himself discreetly. Dr. Howell dismissed all such talk with professional disdain. "The monitors are state-of-the-art. If there were any change in Ethan's condition, we'd know immediately. This is simply an animal behaving unpredictably, which is precisely why animals don't belong in a medical environment." Robert Wilson tended to agree with Dr. Howell. That evening, he pulled Jennifer aside in the small family waiting area. "I think we should ask them to keep the dog away from Ethan's room," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's disruptive, and frankly, it's giving people false hope." Jennifer's eyes flashed with a spark of the woman she'd been before exhaustion and worry had hollowed her out. "False hope, Robert. That dog is the only thing that's shown any reaction to our son in 11 days. The only thing." "That's exactly my point," Robert countered. "You're starting to believe this dog knows something the doctors don't. It's not healthy. Jen, and sitting here watching machines beep while our son doesn't move is—" Jennifer's voice cracked. "At least Apollo is doing something, trying to tell us something." "Dogs don't tell people things," Robert said, then immediately regretted his tone as Jennifer's face crumpled. "Maybe they do. And we're just not listening," she whispered, turning away. Their argument reflected a growing division among the hospital staff. Sarah had begun documenting Apollo's behavior, noting times when his agitation increased or decreased. She enlisted 2 other nurses who shared her shifts, creating an informal observation log. Dave, meanwhile, spent his evening researching Apollo's previous training, calling former handlers from the search and rescue organization. He specialized in finding people trapped under collapsed buildings, Dave told Sarah the next morning, circles under his eyes suggesting a sleepless night. His training was different from most search dogs. Instead of just scenting people, he was taught to detect vibrations, subtle movements that might indicate someone alive under debris. Sarah considered this. So he's extremely sensitive to small movements or vibrations that people might miss. Exactly. And something else his trainer mentioned, that Apollo was particularly good at finding children, something about their different breathing patterns or heartbeats making distinct vibrations. Sarah's eyes widened. And now he's fixated on a child who can't move or communicate. The implication hung between them. But before they could discuss it further, a commotion from room 304 drew their attention. Apollo's barking echoed down the hallway, followed by Jennifer Wilson's voice calling for help. They rushed to find Apollo standing beside Ethan's bed, barking repeatedly at the headboard. The dog's teeth had torn into the plastic frame, and Jennifer was trying unsuccessfully to pull him away. "Apollo, leave it," Dave commanded, but for the first time in their long partnership, the dog completely ignored him. Dr. Howell arrived moments later, her face set in grim lines. "That's it. The dog needs to go now." "Wait," Sarah interjected, pointing to the monitoring equipment. "Look at Ethan's readings." His heart rate increased slightly just before Apollo started barking. Dr. Howell glanced at the monitors, her professional interest momentarily overriding her irritation. "A minor fluctuation, well within normal parameters for a comatose patient." "But what if it's not random?" Sarah pressed. "What if Apollo is sensing something about Ethan's condition that's causing these outbursts?" "Nurse Calloway," Dr. Howell said with the patience one might use with a well-meaning but misguided student, "I appreciate your concern, but we can't base medical decisions on a dog's behavior. The fact remains that Apollo is disrupting this ward and damaging hospital property." As if to underline her point, Apollo resumed his barking, more frantic than before. "I'm sorry, Dave," Dr. Howell concluded firmly, "but the 48-hour grace period is now over. Apollo needs to leave the hospital immediately." Jennifer Wilson stood in the doorway of room 304, watching as Dave attempted to coax Apollo away from Ethan's bedside. The German Shepherd had planted himself firmly on the floor, his muscular body tensed in resistance. "Come on, boy," Dave urged quietly, tugging gently at the leash. "We need to go now." Apollo's amber eyes shifted between Dave and Ethan's still form, a low whine escaping his throat. When Dave pulled again, the dog dug his paws into the linoleum floor, refusing to budge. "I've never seen him like this," Dave admitted to Jennifer, frustration evident in his voice. "In all our years together, he's never disobeyed a direct command." Jennifer twisted the wedding ring on her finger, a nervous habit she'd developed since Ethan's accident. "Can I try something?" she asked hesitantly. Dave nodded, willing to try anything that might resolve the standoff without further upsetting hospital staff. Jennifer disappeared into the small family waiting area and returned moments later with a wrinkled blue T-shirt. "It's Ethan's," she explained. "From his overnight bag. He was wearing it the day before." Her voice trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. She approached Apollo slowly, kneeling beside the vigilant dog. "Apollo," she said softly, holding out the shirt. "Look what I have." The German shepherd's nostrils flared as he caught Ethan's scent. His ears perked forward with interest, but still he didn't move from his position. "It's okay," Jennifer continued, her voice breaking slightly. "You can smell him here, too. See? It's Ethan." She gently pressed the shirt against Apollo's muzzle. Apollo sniffed the garment thoroughly, then looked back at Ethan's bed with such profound sadness in his eyes that Jennifer felt tears welling up. "What if," she whispered to Dave, "we let him keep the shirt and promise to bring him back tomorrow?" Dave considered this compromise. "It might work. He seems to understand more than we give him credit for." Jennifer placed the T-shirt on the floor before Apollo. "We'll come back tomorrow. Apollo, I promise. You can keep watch over Ethan's shirt tonight." Whether it was the familiar scent or Jennifer's sincere promise, Apollo finally relented. He picked up the T-shirt delicately in his mouth and allowed Dave to lead him from the room, though not without a final glance at Ethan's bed. In the corridor, Dr. Howell watched the procession with a mixture of relief and professional skepticism. "Thank you, Mr. Turner," she said formally. "I trust this resolves the situation." Dave nodded, not trusting himself to speak without revealing his frustration with the doctor's inflexibility. Instead, he guided Apollo toward the elevator, the dog still clutching Ethan's shirt like a sacred object. Back in room 304, Sarah Calloway was reviewing Ethan's charts when Jennifer returned. "Jennifer, I'm documenting everything about Apollo's behavior," she told Jennifer quietly. "There's something I noticed in the monitoring data." Jennifer moved closer, hope flickering in her exhausted eyes. "What is it?" Sarah pointed to a series of readings. "These subtle changes in Ethan's breathing pattern, they happen just before Apollo gets agitated. It's not dramatic enough to trigger any alarms, but there's definitely a correlation." "What does it mean?" Jennifer asked. "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted, "but I don't think Apollo is reacting randomly. There's a pattern here." Jennifer sank into the chair beside Ethan's bed, reaching for her son's motionless hand. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew that dog was trying to tell us something." Across town, Dave brought Apollo to his modest ranch house on the outskirts of Phoenix. The dwelling, with its weathered wooden porch and carefully maintained desert landscaping, reflected its owner's practical nature. Inside, framed photographs chronicled Dave's military service and his subsequent work with search and rescue operations around the world. Apollo settled in his bed, Ethan's shirt still clutched protectively between his paws, but refused the food Dave offered. "You need to eat, partner," Dave urged, concerned by the dog's behavior. Apollo had always been lean and athletic, but after nearly 24 hours without food, Dave worried about his health. "You won't be any help to that boy if you make yourself sick." Apollo's only response was to curl more tightly around Ethan's shirt. Dave sat beside the dog's bed, gently stroking his head. "What are you sensing?" "Boy, what do you know that we don't?" As if triggered by the question, memories from their search and rescue days flooded back. Dave recalled a particular mission after a devastating earthquake in Mexico 5 years earlier. Apollo had behaved similarly, then refusing food. fixating on a particular section of rubble that other dogs had passed over. The rescue team had initially dismissed Apollo's insistence, focusing on areas where heat-sensing equipment indicated survivors. But Apollo wouldn't give up. He'd barked and pawed at the same spot for hours until Dave finally convinced the team to investigate. They'd found a 6-year-old boy, alive but unconscious, trapped in a pocket of space that the equipment had somehow missed. The child's unique position had shielded his body heat from detection, but Apollo had sensed the subtle vibrations of his breathing. "You saved that boy when our technology failed," Dave murmured to Apollo, who watched him with intelligent eyes. "Is that what's happening with Ethan?" The following morning, Dave arrived early at the hospital for a meeting with Administrator Langley. Apollo, who had finally eaten a small amount of food before dawn, padded beside him, Ethan's shirt still held carefully in his mouth. Patricia Langley received them in her office, where the expansive windows overlooked the Phoenix skyline. "I understand yesterday was challenging," she began diplomatically. "Apollo is still refusing to stay away from Ethan Wilson," Dave acknowledged. "But I believe there's more to his behavior than simple disobedience." "Dr. Howell disagrees," Langley replied. "She's concerned that the Wilson family, particularly Mrs. Wilson, is developing unrealistic expectations based on the dog's behavior." Dave leaned forward earnestly. "Patricia, in the 15 years I've worked with service and therapy animals, I've never seen behavior like this without reason. Apollo was a search and rescue dog before joining the therapy program. He's specifically trained to detect subtle signs of life that humans and even machines might miss." Administrator Langley's expression remained skeptical. "Are you suggesting that our medical equipment is somehow inadequate?" "Not inadequate," Dave clarified. "Just different. Dogs perceive the world in ways we don't. Their senses pick up things our technology isn't designed to detect. I appreciate your passion for the program." "Dave," Langley said, her tone indicating the conversation was nearing its end, "but I have a hospital to run based on medical science, not animal intuition. I'm willing to allow Apollo to continue visiting other patients, but room 304 is off limits." Dave recognized the compromise for what it was, a final offer. "Thank you," he said, hiding his disappointment. "We'll respect those boundaries." As they left the administration wing, Sarah Calloway intercepted them in the hallway. "I've been looking for you," she said urgently. "Ethan's parents are asking for Apollo. Robert Wilson has changed his mind about the dog." "What happened?" Dave asked, surprised by the reversal. "Robert spent the night in Ethan's room," Sarah explained as they walked. "He said he noticed something around 3 a.m., a subtle change in Ethan's breathing. It was brief, but he's convinced it happened right when Apollo would normally have been alerting." The revelation sent a surge of hope through Dave. If Ethan's father had observed a change that correlated with Apollo's previous behavior, it might lend credibility to their theory. They found Robert and Jennifer in the family consultation room, where Dr. Howell was reviewing Ethan's latest test results. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy with unspoken frustration. "There's no significant change," Dr. Howell was explaining patiently. "These minor fluctuations are common in coma patients. They don't indicate consciousness or improvement." "But they happen at the same time every night," Robert insisted, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks. "Around 3 a.m., just when the nurses said Apollo would start barking." Dr. Howell removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. Mr. Wilson, I understand you're looking for hope, but interpreting normal biological rhythms as meaningful patterns can be misleading. At that moment, Apollo padded into the room, still carrying Ethan's shirt. The dog's presence immediately shifted the dynamics. Jennifer's face softened at the sight of him, while Robert stood, his expression determined. Dr. Howell, he said firmly, I want to request that Apollo be allowed to stay with Ethan tonight, under supervision. Of course. Dr. Howell's surprise was evident. Mr. Wilson, yesterday you were arguing for the dog's removal. That was before I spent the night watching my son, Robert replied. I'm not claiming to understand what's happening, but I'm not willing to ignore any possibility that might help Ethan. Jennifer reached for her husband's hand, tears of gratitude shimmering in her eyes. Dr. Howell looked to Administrator Langley, who had entered behind Dave and Sarah. Patricia, I must formally object. This goes against our decision. Langley observed the scene thoughtfully. Actually, I'd like to propose a compromise. If the Wilsons sign a waiver accepting responsibility, Apollo can visit under direct supervision. We'll place additional monitoring equipment in the room to document any correlation between the dog's behavior and Ethan's condition. Dr. Howell's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, but she recognized she was outnumbered. Very well. But I want it noted that I consider this medically unsound. As the adults debated, Apollo had moved quietly to Jennifer's side, pressing against her leg in a gesture of comfort. She knelt beside him, taking Ethan's shirt gently from his mouth. Thank you for watching over this, she whispered, and for not giving up on my boy. That afternoon, while Ethan's room was being prepared with additional monitoring equipment, Jennifer found herself alone with Apollo in the hospital garden. The small green space, with its drought-resistant plants and shaded benches, offered rare moments of peace for families enduring the sterile confines of the hospital. I used to work with dogs like you, Jennifer told Apollo as they sat beneath a mesquite tree. Did Dave tell you that before Ethan was born, I volunteered with a rescue training program? Apollo's ears perked up, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face. I trained communication cues, she continued, her fingers absently stroking his fur, teaching dogs to indicate when they found someone, even if they couldn't reach them. A memory surfaced, bringing with it a flash of recognition. We used a specific command for persistent alerting for when handlers needed to know the dog had found someone but couldn't get to them. Jennifer's heart quickened as she recalled the command. Signal watch, she whispered, the words feeling foreign after so many years. That's what we taught them to do if they found someone but couldn't reach them, to signal and keep watch. Apollo's reaction was immediate. He sat up straighter, attention fully focused on Jennifer, a small whine escaping his throat. You remember that command? Jennifer realized, astonishment washing over her. But how would you... Her voice trailed off as connections formed in her mind. The earthquake rescue program I volunteered with, they sent teams to Mexico after the big quake 5 years ago. Were you there? Apollo's tail swished against the ground, his body language shifting from alert to excited. Jennifer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's shade. Dave said you were a rescue dog before joining the therapy program. You must have been trained with the same protocols I helped develop. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, quickly searching through her photo archive. There, buried in a folder she hadn't opened in years, was a group picture from her volunteer days. She zoomed in on the back row of handlers and dogs, scanning each face until, oh my God, she breathed. Among the dozen dogs being trained was a younger Apollo, standing beside a handler she didn't recognize. She hadn't worked with him directly, but he had been part of the same program, trained with the same commands she had helped develop. "That's why you're so fixated on Ethan," Jennifer whispered, tears blurring her vision. "You're not just reacting randomly, you're doing what you were trained to do. You're signaling and keeping watch because you found something wrong that we can't see." When Jennifer shared her discovery with Dave, his eyes widened with recognition. "I knew Apollo came from a specialized training program, but I never made the connection to your volunteer work," he admitted. "This explains why he's so determined to stay with Ethan. He's literally following his training to maintain alert on a victim he can't reach." Together, they approached Sarah with their theory, finding her at the nurse's station reviewing Ethan's charts. "So Apollo thinks Ethan is essentially trapped," Sarah clarified after they explained. "Not exactly trapped," Jennifer replied, "but in danger or distress in a way that's not immediately obvious to us. These dogs were trained to detect subtle signs, changes in breathing, tiny movements, even variations in body temperature." Sarah considered this, tapping her pen thoughtfully against the chart. "That would explain the correlation I've been seeing between Apollo's alerts and the minor changes in Ethan's breathing pattern." She lowered her voice. "There's something else. Dr. Collins, he's a neurologist colleague of Dr. Howell's, mentioned that sometimes conventional monitoring misses certain types of seizure activity, especially in coma patients." "Could that be what Apollo is sensing?" Dave asked. "Possibly," Sarah acknowledged. "Dr. Collins suggested doing a more detailed brain scan, but Dr. Howell was reluctant to authorize it without clearer indications of a problem. My son could be having seizures that we're not detecting." Jennifer's voice rose with alarm. Sarah placed a calming hand on her arm. "We don't know that for certain, but if Apollo is sensing something our regular monitoring isn't picking up, it might be worth pushing for those additional tests." As evening approached, Apollo was finally allowed back into room 304. The dog entered cautiously, aware of the many eyes watching him. Dr. Howell stood near the door, her skepticism evident in her rigid posture. Two nurses monitored the additional equipment that had been set up, while Robert and Jennifer sat on either side of Ethan's bed. Apollo approached slowly, sniffing the air. When he reached the bedside, he pressed his nose gently against Ethan's hand, then looked up at the boy's face with intense concentration. "He's calmer than before," Dave observed. "Ethan's breathing has been more regular today," Sarah confirmed, checking the monitors. "No fluctuations since this morning." For several hours, Apollo maintained his quiet vigil, occasionally rising to stretch but never moving far from Ethan's side. As midnight approached, Dr. Howell prepared to leave, clearly disappointed that her skepticism hadn't been validated by any dramatic behavior from the dog. "I'll be on call if needed," she told the night nurse, "but I expect this will be an uneventful night." Robert, who had been dozing in his chair, awoke as Dr. Howell departed. "Maybe Apollo was just having bad days," he suggested sleepily to Jennifer. "Like the rest of us." Jennifer smiled tiredly. "Maybe, but I still think he knows something we don't." Outside, a summer thunderstorm was brewing, the distant rumble of thunder occasionally penetrating the hospital's thick walls. Phoenix's monsoon season had arrived late this year, but was making up for lost time with spectacular electrical displays and sudden downpours. As the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning briefly illuminated the room in stark white flashes. The hospital's backup generators hummed to life as the power fluctuated momentarily. In the momentary darkness before the emergency lights stabilized, Apollo suddenly raised his head, ears forward, body tensing. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "He's doing it again," Robert whispered, fully awake now. The monitors continued to show normal readings, but Apollo was becoming increasingly agitated. He stood, circling Ethan's bed restlessly, his growl deepening. "What is it, boy?" Jennifer asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "What do you see?" As if in response, Apollo jumped up, placing his front paws carefully on the edge of Ethan's mattress. His nose worked frantically, sniffing along Ethan's body until he reached the boy's chest. There, the dog became fixated, staring intently at Ethan's breathing tube. "Sarah?" Dave called urgently to the nurse who had just entered for her regular check. "Something's wrong. Apollo's alerting." The storm's fury matched the growing tension in room 304. Rain pounded against the windows like desperate fists as lightning transformed the night sky into a strobe-lit chaos. Within the hospital room, Apollo's behavior escalated from concerned vigilance to unmistakable alarm. "Get down, Apollo," Dave commanded. But the urgency in his voice lacked conviction. Even he could sense something had changed. The German Shepherd ignored him completely, his focus laser-locked on Ethan's chest. Apollo's bark erupted suddenly, 3 sharp, commanding sounds that seemed to echo off the walls despite the storm's competing cacophony. Sarah moved quickly to Ethan's side, her experienced eyes scanning the monitors. "Vitals are still normal," she reported, though her tone carried a note of uncertainty that betrayed her growing trust in Apollo's instincts over the machines. Jennifer stood frozen, one hand pressed against her mouth, while Robert moved to the opposite side of the bed, leaning close to examine his son. "Everything looks the same," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "His color, his breathing." The power flickered again, longer this time. The backup generators hummed louder, struggling against the storm's assault on Phoenix's electrical grid. When the lights stabilized, Apollo had somehow maneuvered himself further onto Ethan's bed, his front paws planted firmly on either side of the boy's thin shoulders. "Apollo." "No." Dave lunged forward, reaching for the dog's collar. "You can't be on the patient's bed." But before his fingers could close around the leather band, Apollo did something that stopped everyone in the room. With deliberate precision, the dog gently took the breathing tube connector in his mouth and tugged not hard enough to dislodge it, but with clear intent. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, pushing past Dave to get a closer look. "The connection. It's not right." Her trained fingers moved to where Apollo had been focused, examining the junction between the breathing tube and the ventilator hose. "It's loose," she announced, her professional calm giving way to urgency. "The connection's failing. It's barely attached." She reached for the call button, pressing it repeatedly. "I need respiratory in here now," she shouted, knowing the intercom would carry her voice to the nurse's station. "What does that mean?" Jennifer asked, panic rising in her voice. "What's happening?" Sarah was already moving, checking the settings on the ventilator. The tube that helps Ethan breathe wasn't properly connected. If it had disconnected completely, he wouldn't be getting enough oxygen. "But the monitors," Robert began, "show his current levels." Sarah finished for him. "They don't predict what would have happened if the tube had separated completely, which it was about to do." Apollo remained in position, his eyes fixed on the tube as if daring it to slip again. When the respiratory therapist rushed in moments later, the dog reluctantly allowed himself to be drawn back but stayed within inches of the bed, trembling with tension. "Pressure drop in the system," the therapist confirmed after a quick examination. "Coupling was definitely compromised. Good catch." Sarah glanced at Apollo. "Thank him," she said quietly. "None of us noticed." As the respiratory therapist worked to secure a proper connection, Dr. Howell appeared in the doorway, hastily dressed, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. The distinguished physician looked uncharacteristically disheveled, clearly having rushed from home when alerted. "What's happening?" she demanded, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. The respiratory therapist straightened up. "Ventilator coupling was failing, Doctor. Another hour, maybe less, and it would have disconnected completely." "Doctor." Howell's gaze swept the room, lingering on Apollo. "And how exactly was this discovered at 3 in the morning during a power fluctuation?" "The dog alerted us," Sarah stated firmly, no longer hesitant about crediting Apollo. "He's been trying to tell us something was wrong with Ethan's breathing tube for days." A complex series of emotions crossed Dr. Howell's face: disbelief, irritation, and finally a reluctant curiosity. "That's quite a claim. Nurse Calloway?" "It's what happened," Robert interjected, stepping forward. His normally reserved demeanor had given way to something fiercer, more protective. "That dog knew something was wrong before any of your machines did. He's been trying to warn us, and we've been ignoring him." Jennifer moved to Apollo's side, kneeling to wrap her arms around the dog's muscular neck. "Thank you," she whispered against his fur. "Thank you for not giving up." The tension in the room shifted as Dave's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He stepped into the hallway to answer it, returning moments later with widened eyes. "That was hospital security," he announced. "The storms caused flooding in the East Wing. They're implementing emergency protocols and may need to relocate some patients." Dr. Howell's professional demeanor reasserted itself immediately. "I'll need to coordinate with the other attending physicians," she said, already turning toward the door. "Nurse Calloway, ensure all equipment in this room has backup power connections checked and secured." She paused at the threshold, glancing back at Apollo with an unreadable expression. "The dog can stay," she added, the words clearly difficult for her to pronounce. "For now." As dawn approached, the storm gradually receded, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a transformed atmosphere within room 304. The night's events had created an unspoken alliance among those who had witnessed Apollo's vindication. Even the most skeptical night nurse now paused to acknowledge the German shepherd when entering the room. Apollo himself had finally settled into an exhausted sleep beneath Ethan's bed, his mission temporarily fulfilled. The hospital maintenance staff had secured all power connections and double-checked every piece of equipment in the room, ensuring no further failures could occur undetected. Robert and Jennifer sat side by side now, their hands intertwined, the first genuine connection they'd shared in months. The strain of Ethan's accident had widened existing fractures in their marriage, but Apollo's dedication had somehow bridged the gap, giving them common purpose again. "I was wrong," Robert said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "About the dog. About a lot of things." Jennifer squeezed his hand. "We were both just trying to cope in our own ways." "Remember that marriage counselor we saw last year?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said we needed to find something bigger than ourselves to unite around. I thought it was New Age nonsense at the time." A small smile touched Jennifer's lips. "And now we're united around a German shepherd who's smarter than most of the people I know?" "I think it's more than that," Robert replied, looking at their son's still face. "It's about faith when logic fails us. You never stopped believing Ethan would come back to us." "Neither did Apollo," Jennifer added. The moment was interrupted as Dave returned from taking Apollo for a brief outdoor break. The dog looked refreshed, padding directly to his position beside Ethan's bed as if reporting for duty. "He actually ate something," Dave reported with evident relief. "First real meal in days." Sarah, who had stayed well past the end of her shift, looked up from her documentation. "That's a good sign. Maybe he senses the immediate danger has passed." Dave nodded, watching as Apollo settled into his vigilant posture. "In search and rescue work, dogs sometimes show stress behaviors when they've found someone but can't get help to them quickly enough. Once they know help has arrived, they often relax." "You think he knows we finally understood his warning?" Robert asked. "I think he knows we're finally paying attention," Dave replied. As morning rounds began, the hospital's routine reasserted itself. Staff changed shifts, breakfast trays clattered down hallways, and administrators in fresh suits emerged from elevators. The crisis of the night receded into hospital lore, already being whispered about in break rooms and over coffee in the cafeteria. Dr. Collins, the neurologist Sarah had mentioned earlier, arrived mid-morning to examine Ethan. He was younger than Dr. Howell, with a thoughtful demeanor that contrasted with her more authoritative approach. "I've heard quite a story about last night," he commented as he reviewed Ethan's chart. "Margaret, Dr. Howell called me personally." "That's a first." "She's still not convinced the dog actually sensed something wrong," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. Dr. Collins smiled slightly. "Margaret believes in what she can measure. It's made her an excellent physician, if somewhat rigid in her thinking." He glanced at Apollo, who watched his every move with careful attention. "I'm more interested in the fact that this animal detected a problem before our equipment did. That suggests he's perceiving something our monitoring isn't capturing." "Could it be seizure activity?" Sarah asked, voicing the concern she'd been harboring. "Possibly," Dr. Collins acknowledged. "Subclinical seizures can be difficult to detect without specialized monitoring." He made a notation in Ethan's chart. "I'm ordering a comprehensive EEG with video monitoring. If there's unusual brain activity happening, especially around 3 a.m. when the dog has been most agitated, we need to know." The testing equipment was set up by early afternoon additional monitors and electrodes attached to Ethan's head to capture even the smallest electrical activity in his brain. Apollo watched the process with intense interest. Moving only when necessary to allow the technicians access, We'll be recording continuously, Dr. Collins explained to the Wilsons, but I'd like to pay special attention during the hours when Apollo has shown increased agitation. If there's a correlation between his behavior and Ethan's brain activity, it could be significant. Jennifer nodded gratefully. Thank you for taking this seriously. Medicine advances when we remain curious, Dr. Collins replied simply. Sometimes that means considering possibilities outside our current understanding. As evening approached once more, Administrator Langley made an unexpected appearance in room 304. Her tailored suit and composed demeanor seemed at odds with the room's tense atmosphere, but her expression was softer than usual. I've been briefed about last night's events, she said, addressing both the Wilsons and the medical staff present. I want to assure you that we're taking this situation very seriously. She turned to Dave. The therapy animal program has always been valuable to St. Elizabeth's, but I believe we may need to reevaluate its potential in more diagnostic capacities. Dave recognized the administrator's carefully phrased words for what they were, a significant concession from someone who preferred data to intuition. Apollo's training might be relevant to other patients as well, he suggested cautiously, especially those who can't communicate their distress conventionally. Langley nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. For now, though, our focus remains on Ethan, she addressed the Wilsons directly. We've arranged for continuous staff presence in this room tonight. In addition to the monitoring equipment, if anything changes, anything at all, action will be immediate. After she departed, Robert looked at Jennifer with raised eyebrows. Did the hospital administrator just admit a dog might know something her medical equipment doesn't? Progress comes in strange packages, Jennifer replied with the ghost of a smile. As night fell once more, room 304 had been transformed into something resembling a command center. Dr. Collins had returned to oversee the EEG monitoring personally, joined by a neurology resident and a rotating nursing team. Dave remained with Apollo, while Robert and Jennifer maintained their vigil on either side of Ethan's bed. We're recording everything, Dr. Collins assured them. Both Ethan's medical data and Apollo's behavior. If there's a pattern to find, we'll find it. The hours ticked by without incident. Apollo remained alert but calm, occasionally rising to stretch, but never straying far from Ethan's side. The monitoring equipment hummed softly, recording every neural impulse, every breath, every heartbeat. As 3 a.m. approached once more, a palpable tension filled the room. Dr. Collins watched the monitors intently, while Dave observed Apollo for any change in demeanor. The Wilsons, exhausted but determined, refused offers to rest. 2 minutes to 3, the neurology resident announced quietly. Apollo's ears suddenly perked forward. He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion, his attention fixed on Ethan with laser focus. A low whine escaped his throat. Something's starting, Dave said, recognizing the change in Apollo's body language immediately. Dr. Collins leaned toward the EEG display, his expression intensifying. I'm seeing some unusual activity starting in the temporal lobe, he confirmed. Not enough to register as a clinical seizure yet, but definitely abnormal. Apollo moved closer to the bed, his whine deepening to a soft growl. His nose worked frantically, sniffing along Ethan's body as he had done the previous night. Oxygen saturation still normal, the resident reported, Breathing regular. Jennifer reached for Robert's hand, gripping it tightly as they watched Apollo's behavior becoming increasingly agitated. The dog began pawing gently at the side of the mattress, his movements deliberate but urgent. EEG activity increasing, Dr. Collins noted, his voice tense with concentration. This is definitely seizure-like activity, but localized. The primary monitors wouldn't typically flag this. Apollo suddenly barked a sharp, commanding sound that made everyone in the room jump. The dog's eyes were fixed on Ethan's face with such intensity that several people instinctively followed his gaze. "Wait." Robert started forward. "Did his eyelid just twitch?" Dr. Collins moved quickly to Ethan's side, pulling a small pen light from his pocket. "Possible increased responsiveness during this brain activity," he said, shining the light briefly across Ethan's closed eyes. "Their definite pupillary response." Apollo barked again, more insistently this time. "Look at the EEG," the resident called, pointing to the monitor where the pattern of lines had changed dramatically. "That's a significant spike in activity." In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Ethan's fingers, still and unresponsive for nearly 2 weeks, twitched visibly, a small movement but unmistakable. "Oh my God," Jennifer gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "His hand, he moved his hand." Dr. Collins was already calling for additional staff. "I need a full neurology team in here now," he ordered into the phone. "Patient showing signs of emerging consciousness during a localized seizure event." Apollo's behavior transformed instantly from agitation to triumph. The dog's tail wagged vigorously as he looked from Ethan to the humans around him, as if to say, "See, this is what I've been trying to tell you." "He knew," Robert whispered, awe in his voice. Somehow, he knew these episodes were opportunities, moments when Ethan was closer to consciousness. As medical staff rushed into the room, bringing equipment and expertise, Apollo finally relaxed his vigilant posture. With the quiet dignity of a mission accomplished, the German shepherd settled onto the floor beside Jennifer's chair, leaning gently against her leg in silent comfort. Dr. Collins worked rapidly with his team, conducting tests and assessments as Ethan continued to show subtle signs of responsiveness. "These aren't random movements," he confirmed after several minutes. "He's definitely reacting to stimuli during these episodes, in the controlled chaos of medical activity." Dave knelt beside Apollo, rubbing the dog's ears with grateful hands. "Good boy," he murmured. "The best boy?" The dog's intelligent eyes met his, conveying a wisdom that transcended species. In that moment, something profound passed between handler and animal, a recognition that some connections defy explanation but demand respect. As dawn approached once more, bringing with it the promise of a new day and newfound hope, Apollo closed his eyes for the first time in many nights, finally allowing himself to rest. His mission wasn't complete. Ethan's journey back to consciousness was just beginning, but the most important message had finally been delivered and understood. The dog who bit the bed had forced them all to see what the machines could not. The cautious optimism that had bloomed in room 304 withered under the harsh light of medical reality as the day progressed. While Ethan had indeed shown responsiveness during the 3 a.m. episode, his condition afterward had not only stabilized but regressed. By noon, Dr. Collins' initially hopeful expression had transformed into one of measured concern as he studied the overnight EEG results. "What we're seeing is complex," he explained to the Wilsons, who sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces etched with the particular exhaustion that comes from hope suddenly deferred. Ethan experienced what we call paradoxical arousal during a subclinical seizure. These brief windows of responsiveness can happen in coma patients, but they don't necessarily indicate a straightforward path to consciousness. Jennifer's fingers twisted her wedding ring with increasing agitation. "But he moved. We all saw it." "Yes," Dr. Collins acknowledged gently. "But the brain activity that allowed that movement has subsided. The seizure activity itself is concerning. It suggests there may be areas of injury we didn't detect in our initial scans." Robert, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "So, we're saying this is actually bad news, that our son moving for the first time in 2 weeks is a problem." Dr. Collins sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "Medicine isn't always linear, Mr. Wilson. What we've discovered is valuable information that helps us understand Ethan's condition better, but it comes with complications. We need to address this seizure activity before it potentially causes further damage." The doctor's words fell heavy in the room. Each syllable another weight added to the already crushing burden the Wilsons carried. Apollo, who had been resting quietly in the corner, raised his head at the shift in emotional atmosphere, his ears perking forward with renewed concern. "I'm ordering an enhanced MRI," Dr. Collins continued, his professional demeanor softening with genuine compassion. "We need to look more closely at the areas showing unusual activity." After Dr. Collins departed, the room fell into a leaden silence, broken only by the steady, mocking rhythm of the monitors. Jennifer finally surrendered to the tears she'd been fighting, her shoulders shaking with the effort to remain quiet. Robert pulled her against him, his own eyes wet with frustrated grief. "I thought we were turning a corner," she whispered against his shoulder. "I let myself believe it." Dave, who had been standing respectfully near the door during the doctor's explanation, moved closer. "If I may," he said softly, "in rescue work, we often find that progress isn't a straight line. Sometimes we take 2 steps back to find the right path forward." Jennifer nodded without raising her head, unable to summon the energy for more. By mid-afternoon, Ethan had been taken for his enhanced MRI, leaving the room strangely empty without his still presence at its center. Apollo paced restlessly near the door, whining softly every few minutes. "He knows something's wrong," Dave observed, watching the dog's agitated movement. "He's worried about Ethan." "That makes all of us," Robert replied, his voice flat with fatigue. The results of the MRI arrived with Dr. Howell, who had apparently been called in to consult. Her expression was grave as she spread the images across the light board. "There's a small hematoma developing here," she explained, pointing to a shadowy area near Ethan's brainstem. "It wasn't visible on our earlier scans, but has likely been growing slowly. This explains both the seizure activity and why Apollo was becoming increasingly agitated. The pressure has been gradually increasing." Jennifer pressed her hand against her mouth. Is it operable, Doctor?" Howell's hesitation told them everything before she spoke. "It's in an extremely delicate location. Surgery carries significant risks." "And not operating?" Robert asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Also carries significant risks. Dr. Howell confirmed. If the bleeding continues and pressure increases, it could cause permanent damage. The cruel paradox hung in the air: to act might harm Ethan, but to wait almost certainly would. I need to consult with our neurosurgical team, Dr. Howell continued. This requires careful consideration. In the meantime, we'll start medication to reduce the swelling and monitor him closely. After she left, Dave cleared his throat awkwardly. I should take Apollo out for a break, he said, reaching for the dog's leash. He hasn't been outside in hours. But Apollo, who had always been obedient despite his recent focused determination, now planted his feet firmly and refused to move toward the door. The German shepherd's entire body tensed, his eyes fixed on the empty bed with an expression that seemed almost human in its concern. Apollo, come, Dave commanded more firmly, tugging gently on the leash. The dog's resistance was immediate and complete. He sat down, a low whine escaping his throat. Let me try, Jennifer said, kneeling beside Apollo. It's okay, boy. Ethan will be back soon. You can go with Dave now. Apollo's intelligent eyes met hers, and for a moment, Jennifer felt he understood every word, but still, he refused to move. I've never seen him like this, Dave admitted, concern creeping into his voice. Even during his most intense search and rescue operations, he always responded to commands. Hospital Administrator Langley appeared in the doorway, her expression unusually somber. I've just spoken with Dr. Howell, she said without preamble. I'm afraid I have to insist that Apollo be removed from the hospital while we address Ethan's medical situation. We need to eliminate all variables and focus entirely on his critical care. Jennifer stood, outrage temporarily overriding her exhaustion. That dog is the reason we even know about Ethan's condition. He's been right all along. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Wilson, Langley replied, her tone softening slightly. But this is a medical decision. Dr. Howell and the neurosurgical team need to work without distraction or complication. Dave stepped forward. With all due respect, Administrator Langley, Apollo has proven himself to be an asset in Ethan's care, not a liability. Nevertheless, my decision stands, Langley said firmly. Mr. Turner, please remove Apollo from the premises immediately. You may return yourself, of course. But the dog must go. The directive hung in the air like a thunderclap. Dave looked helplessly at the Wilsons, torn between hospital authority and what he increasingly believed was Apollo's crucial role in Ethan's care. It's not right, Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her face once more. He deserves to be here. Robert, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke. Dave, take him home. We'll call you the moment there's any news. He turned to his wife, taking her trembling hands in his. Jen, we need to focus on Ethan now. The doctors are doing everything they can. With visible reluctance, Dave managed to coax Apollo toward the door, though the dog looked back repeatedly, his distress evident in every line of his powerful body. As they disappeared down the hallway, Jennifer collapsed into a chair, the latest blow in their ongoing nightmare sapping her remaining strength. He knew, she repeated brokenly. He knew all along. And we're sending him away just when Ethan needs him most. Outside in the parking lot, the Arizona heat slammed into Dave and Apollo like a physical wall. The asphalt shimmered with heat mirages as Dave opened his truck door, the interior an oven after sitting in the summer sun. Apollo, normally eager to jump into the vehicle, stood rooted beside the hospital entrance, his gaze fixed on the building as though he could see through walls to the boy he'd been guarding. "I know, buddy," Dave murmured, his own heart heavy with the feeling they were abandoning their post. "I know, Doctor." Margaret Howell stood before the light board in the neurosurgery conference room, her silver hair pulled back in its customary severe bun, though several strands had escaped during the long hours of consultation. Around the oval table sat 5 other physicians, their expressions varying from skeptical to concerned as they studied the series of brain scans displayed before them. "The developing hematoma is clear," Dr. Howell stated, pointing to the shadowy mass with a laser pointer. "What's unclear is why our standard monitoring failed to detect it until now." Dr. Collins leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "That's not entirely accurate. Margaret, our monitoring didn't detect it, the dog did." A dismissive snort came from Dr. Patel, the chief neurosurgeon. "Please, Richard, let's not muddy serious medical discussion with anecdotes about animals." "It's hardly an anecdote," Dr. Collins countered, his normally mild demeanor sharpening. "We have documented evidence that the German Shepherd detected changes in the patient's condition days before our equipment registered anything concerning his behavior patterns directly correlated with the seizure activity we're now observing." Dr. Howell's mouth tightened into a thin line. She had built her distinguished career on empirical evidence, measurable outcomes, and the steady advancement of medical technology. The suggestion that a dog had outperformed her state-of-the-art monitoring equipment challenged everything she believed about modern medicine. "Even if we accept that the animal somehow sensed the patient's deterioration," she said carefully, "it doesn't change our current situation. This hematoma requires immediate attention." Back in Dave Turner's modest ranch house, Apollo lay beside the front door, his dinner untouched for the 2nd consecutive night. The German Shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the entrance, his body tense with expectation. Occasionally, he would rise, pace a tight circle, then return to his position, a sentry waiting to resume his post. Dave watched from his worn leather recliner, concern etched across his weathered face. "You need to eat, partner," he urged, not for the first time. "You can't help anyone if you make yourself sick." Apollo's only acknowledgement was a brief flick of his ears. The silence was broken by Dave's cell phone vibrating against the coffee table. He snatched it up, recognizing Sarah Calloway's number on the screen. "Any news?" he asked without preamble. "They're taking Ethan into surgery within the hour," Sarah replied, her voice low and tense. "The bleeding increased suddenly about 20 minutes ago. Dr. Patel is going to attempt to relieve the pressure." Dave closed his eyes briefly. "How are the Wilsons holding up?" "As well as can be expected," Sarah said, which they both understood meant barely. "Jennifer hasn't stopped asking about Apollo. I think having him here gave her something to focus on besides Ethan's condition." Dave glanced at the vigilant dog. "He's not doing well either. Won't eat, won't rest properly. It's like he knows something's happening. There was a pause on the line before Sarah spoke again, her voice dropping even lower. "That's actually why I'm calling. Dr. Collins has been reviewing the data from when Apollo was here, correlating it with Ethan's brain activity. He's found something significant." Apollo's head suddenly lifted, his attention shifting from the door to Dave, as if he understood the conversation's importance. "The dog wasn't just detecting the hematoma," Sarah continued. "According to Dr. Collins, Apollo was most agitated during the precise windows when Ethan was experiencing those brief periods of responsiveness. It's as if he knew when Ethan was closest to consciousness and was trying to alert us to those specific moments." Dave sat forward, pulse quickening. "That makes sense. Search and rescue dogs are trained to alert more intensely when they detect signs of life, especially if the victim shows any response to their presence. Dr. Collins thinks Apollo might be an important part of Ethan's recovery process," Sarah said. "If, when Ethan survives this surgery, having familiar stimuli that he's previously responded to could be crucial. Does Dr. Howell know you're telling me this?" Sarah's dry laugh carried clearly through the phone. "What do you think?" She's still resisting the idea that Apollo contributed anything meaningful, but Dr. Collins has allies on the neurology team, and they're pushing to document this as a case study. After they disconnected, Dave knelt beside Apollo, gently stroking the dog's sleek head. "You knew all along, didn't you? Not just that something was wrong, but when Ethan was trying to reach out." Apollo's intelligent eyes met his, conveying a certainty that transcended the barriers between their species. Across town in St. Elizabeth's operating theater, Dr. Patel worked with meticulous precision, his gloved hands steady as he navigated the delicate tissues of Ethan's brain. The room was hushed, except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional murmured request for instruments. Dr. Howell observed from behind the surgical team, her experienced eyes missing nothing. Despite her skepticism about Apollo's role, she found herself wondering if the dog had somehow sensed the developing crisis before their technology could detect it. The thought was professionally unsettling. In the surgical waiting room, Robert and Jennifer Wilson sat side by side, their hands clasped in white-knuckled tension. The room's bland attempts at comfort, muted colors, generic landscape paintings, outdated magazines seemed almost offensive in the face of their terror. "I keep thinking about Apollo," Jennifer whispered, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. "How desperate he was to make us understand. How we almost didn't listen." Robert squeezed her hand. "He made us listen. That's what matters." Jennifer turned to face her husband, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "If we lose Ethan after all this—" "We won't," Robert interrupted with fierce certainty. "Our boy is fighting. Apollo knew it, and now we do too." The surgery lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. When Dr. Patel finally emerged, still in his surgical cap, his expression gave nothing away. "We've successfully relieved the pressure from the hematoma," he announced without preamble. "The bleeding is controlled, and the initial pressure readings are promising. However," he cautioned, raising a hand to temper their visible relief, "the next 24 to 48 hours are critical. We won't know the full extent of any potential damage until Ethan begins to regain consciousness, if he does. When Jennifer corrected automatically. When he regains consciousness. Dr. Patel's professional mask softened slightly. When? He conceded with a small nod. As dawn broke the following day, Dave's phone rang again. This time, it was Robert Wilson. Ethan made it through the night, he reported. Exhaustion and cautious hope mingling in his voice. His vitals are stable, and Dr. Collins says the early signs are positive. That's wonderful news, Dave replied sincerely. There's something else, Robert continued. Dr. Collins has been reviewing all the data from when Apollo was here. He's presented a strong case to Dr. Howell and Administrator Langley that Apollo was responding to patterns in Ethan's brain activity that our monitoring wasn't designed to detect. He believes Apollo could be beneficial to Ethan's recovery process. Dave glanced at Apollo, who had risen to full alertness at the sound of the phone. What exactly are you saying? Robert, I'm saying they want Apollo back at the hospital, Robert replied, a smile evident in his voice despite his fatigue. Dr. Collins believes familiar stimuli that Ethan has previously responded to could help facilitate his return to consciousness. And apparently, there's documented evidence that Ethan responded to Apollo's presence during those seizure episodes. The significance of this reversal wasn't lost on Dave. For a hospital administration that had insisted on Apollo's removal to now request his return represented a seismic shift in their understanding of his role in Ethan's care. There's one condition, Robert added, his tone becoming more serious. Dr. Howell wants to formalize everything monitoring Apollo's behavior, documenting correlations with Ethan's condition. She's approaching this as a clinical study now. Dave couldn't suppress a small smile. Converting the skeptic. Are we? Let's just say she's willing to consider alternative forms of patient monitoring, Robert replied diplomatically. The important thing is, they want Apollo back, today, if possible. When Dave shared the news with Apollo, the transformation was immediate and profound. The German shepherd, who had been listless and uninterested in food for days, suddenly bounded to his feet, tail wagging with unmistakable purpose. He stood by the door, looking back at Dave with an expression that clearly said, "What are we waiting for?" As Dave gathered Apollo's service vest and leash, his phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. Dr. Collins just reviewed Ethan's latest EEG, brain activity increasing, possible emergence from coma imminent. Apollo might be arriving just in time. The revelation sent a surge of emotion through Dave. After days of doubt, dismissal, and struggle, the connection between Apollo and Ethan, something that had defied conventional medical explanation, was finally being recognized not as superstition or coincidence, but as a legitimate phenomenon worthy of professional investigation. What had begun as a mystery, a therapy dog inexplicably biting a hospital bed, had evolved into something that challenged the boundaries between animal instinct and medical science. As Dave clipped the leash to Apollo's collar, he reflected that some connections transcend our ability to measure or explain them, yet are no less real for their mystery. "Ready to go back to work, partner?" Dave asked, already knowing the answer. Apollo's eager bark needed no translation. His mission wasn't complete yet, but for the first time, he wouldn't be working alone. The doctors who had once dismissed him were now allies in the same vital cause, bringing Ethan Wilson back to the world and the family that waited for him. Apollo's return to St. Elizabeth's Children's Hospital occurred with considerably more fanfare than his unceremonious removal. Administrator Langley herself waited in the lobby, her customary austere demeanor softened by what might have been, had anyone dared suggest it, a touch of humility. "Mr. Turner," she greeted Dave formally. Then her eyes dropped to Apollo. The German shepherd stood at perfect attention, his service vest immaculate, eyes bright with purpose. "And Apollo, thank you both for coming back on such short notice." Dave nodded, keeping his satisfaction carefully contained. Apollo's eager to resume his duties. "Yes. Well," Langley replied, clearing her throat. "Dr. Collins has established a rather unconventional protocol for this situation. I've approved it on a provisional basis, given the unique circumstances." As she led them toward the elevator, several staff members paused in their duties to watch Apollo pass. Word had spread quickly through the hospital grapevine the therapy dog, who had detected a patient's hidden condition when sophisticated medical equipment had failed, was returning as something between honored guest and consulting specialist. "Is this what vindication feels like?" Dave murmured to Apollo as they stepped into the elevator. The dog's ears twitched in response, his focus already shifting to the task ahead. Room 304 had been transformed in their absence. The additional monitoring equipment remained, now supplemented with cameras positioned to capture Apollo's behavior alongside Ethan's readings. Dr. Collins stood beside one of the monitors, conferring quietly with the technician. When he noticed their arrival, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Perfect timing," he greeted them. "Ethan's showing increased responsiveness this morning. His EEG patterns are the strongest they've been since surgery." Jennifer Wilson rose from her chair beside Ethan's bed, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes, but a new spark of hope animating her movements. She knelt immediately, wrapping her arms around Apollo's sturdy neck. "Thank you for coming back," she whispered against his fur. "He needs you." Apollo accepted her embrace with dignified patience, but his attention remained fixed on the bed where Ethan lay. The boy's appearance had changed subtly since their departure. Some of the tubes had been removed, and his color seemed better, the waxy pallor replaced by a healthier tone. Robert Wilson, who had been speaking with a nurse in the corner, approached with outstretched hand. "Dave, I can't thank you enough for bringing Apollo back," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "After everything." Dave clasped his hand warmly. "No thanks necessary. Apollo and I are just glad to be back on the team." Howell entered the room then, her silver hair once again restrained in its perfect bun, clipboard in hand. Her eyes met Dave's briefly, an unspoken acknowledgment passing between them before her professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Mr. Turner, we've established a protocol for monitoring Apollo's interactions with Ethan," she explained, indicating the cameras and additional equipment. "We'll be documenting any correlations between his behavior and changes in Ethan's neurological status." Dave nodded, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "Dr. Howell might never fully embrace the idea that Apollo possessed abilities beyond scientific explanation, but she was willing to investigate the phenomenon with proper medical rigor. "Apollo's ready whenever you are," Dave replied simply. Dr. Collins stepped forward. "I'd like to establish a baseline first. Could you have Apollo approach Ethan's bed normally, as he would during a regular therapy visit?" Dave unclipped Apollo's leash, giving him a gentle hand signal. "Apollo, visit," he commanded softly. The German shepherd moved forward with dignified purpose, approaching Ethan's bedside with calm professionalism. He gently placed his muzzle near the boy's hand, his posture relaxed but attentive. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, showing no significant changes. "Now," Dr. Collins continued, watching both Apollo and the monitors. "Jennifer mentioned that Apollo seemed to respond most strongly around 3 a.m., which correlates with the time we documented increased brain activity in Ethan. It's currently 10:17 a.m., so we're outside that window, but I'm curious to see if there's any response to direct stimulation." He turned to Jennifer. "Mrs. Wilson, would you mind speaking to Ethan as you normally would? Sometimes familiar voices can trigger responses in coma patients." Jennifer moved to her son's side, taking his limp hand in hers. "Ethan, sweetheart," she began, her voice tender but steady. "Apollo's back to see you. Remember how excited you were about him at your school? He remembers you too." As if understanding the introduction, Apollo inched closer, his nose delicately investigating Ethan's arm and chest. Suddenly, the dog's ears perked forward, his body tensing slightly. Dr. Collins glanced quickly at the monitors. "There's a small spike in brain activity," he noted, pointing to one of the screens where a pattern of lines had briefly intensified. "Apollo reacted just before we registered the change." Dr. Howell moved closer, studying the readings with narrowed eyes. "Interesting," she murmured, making a notation on her clipboard. "The timing is suggestive." "Suggestive," Robert repeated, a hint of challenge in his voice. "Apollo just responded to a change in Ethan's condition before your machines did. Again, Doctor." Howell met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Wilson, I understand your frustration, but good science requires careful observation over time. One correlation is interesting. Repeated correlations become compelling evidence. We'll have plenty of opportunities to gather that evidence," Dr. Collins interjected diplomatically. "For now, let's focus on the positive. Ethan is showing responsiveness, and Apollo appears able to detect these moments." Throughout the day, they established a rhythm. Apollo remained positioned near Ethan's bed, occasionally rising to stretch but never wandering far. Each time the monitor showed even a slight change in Ethan's brain activity, Apollo would alert, sometimes seconds before the equipment registered the shift. By late afternoon, even Dr. Howell had stopped qualifying her observations with skeptical caveats. "The dog's consistency is remarkable," she admitted to Dr. Collins, as they reviewed the accumulated data. "The predictive value of his behavior could be significant for patients with similar conditions. Perhaps there's a place for both cutting-edge technology and ancient instincts in modern medicine," Dr. Collins suggested with a small smile. As evening approached, A new calm settled over room 304. The urgent crisis had passed, replaced by the quieter, more patient work of healing and recovery. Jennifer and Robert took turns napping in the reclining chair, while Dave maintained a watchful eye on Apollo, who showed no signs of tiring in his resumed vigil. Shortly after midnight, Apollo suddenly raised his head, ears forward, body alert. The movement was so decisive that Dave immediately checked the monitors, expecting to see a significant change in Ethan's readings, but the lines remained steady, showing no variation from the patterns of the past several hours. "False alarm," he whispered to Apollo. The German shepherd ignored him completely, rising to his feet and moving deliberately to the head of Ethan's bed, with gentle precision. Apollo placed his paws on the edge of the mattress, a position he had been specifically trained not to take without permission, and leaned forward, his nose inches from Ethan's face. Jennifer, who had been dozing in the chair, woke at the movement. "What's happening?" she asked, instantly alert. "I'm not sure," Dave admitted. "The monitors aren't showing any changes, but Apollo's clearly responding to something." They watched as Apollo remained perfectly still, his focus unwavering. Then, so subtly they might have missed it if they hadn't been watching intently, Ethan's eyelids fluttered. "Robert!" Jennifer called urgently, reaching to shake her husband awake. "Robert, look." The flutter came again, more pronounced this time. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Ethan Wilson's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening. They registered first the ceiling, then the dog, hovering attentively above him. "Oh, my God," Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, sweetie, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes moved slowly toward his mother's voice, recognition dawning in their blue depths. His lips parted, and though no sound emerged, the effort was unmistakable. Apollo, his mission finally complete, gently lowered himself back to the floor. The German shepherd's tail wagged once, a restrained expression of profound satisfaction. He had kept his watch faithfully, and at last his charge had returned. As Robert rushed to alert the medical staff and the room erupted into controlled chaos, Dave knelt beside Apollo, wrapping his arms around the dog, who had transformed from therapy animal to medical pioneer. "You did it, boy," he whispered against Apollo's fur. "You brought him back to them." In Apollo's intelligent eyes gleamed the quiet wisdom of a creature who had never doubted his purpose, even when those around him had failed to understand. Some bonds transcend explanation, some instincts defy measurement, and sometimes the most sophisticated instruments in human invention cannot compete with the ancient, perfect loyalty of a dog who refuses to give up on those he has chosen to protect. When Apollo refused to leave Ethan's bedside, biting that hospital bed frame despite everyone's doubts, he reminded us of something our high-tech world too often forgets. Some connections can't be measured by machines, like many of us who've been dismissed as too old or out of touch. Apollo's wisdom was ignored until it couldn't be denied any longer. Remember when doctors listened more and relied on instinct alongside their instruments? Apollo does. He represents the faithful guardians in our own lives, the spouse who noticed symptoms before any doctor, the friend who sensed something wasn't right, the parent who fought for answers when everyone else gave up. In our younger days, we trusted these inexplicable bonds. We knew that love creates a vigilance no technology can match. Apollo's story speaks to all of us who've stood watch through long nights, who've refused to leave when told our help wasn't needed, who've insisted on being heard when professionals dismissed our concerns. His loyalty reminds us that sometimes the most powerful force in healing isn't found in medical textbooks. It's in the unwavering commitment to protect those we love, whatever the cost, whatever